I am very sorry you have to find out this way, but I'm not interested in this marriage. So move on, you sick fool.
The streets outside hummed with the distant roar of buses, the honking of impatient drivers, and the occasional shout of hawkers peddling wares to night travelers. But inside the small, dimly lit apartment on Victoria Island, silence was suffocating. A silence broken only by the shallow, labored breaths of a woman lying on a hospital bed-sized mattress. She was wrapped in a
How
threadbare
could you?
blanket that did
I
little to
can't
shield her
believe
frail
this.
body from the cold
I'm
draft
done.
sneaking through the cracked window. Ifeoma's eyes flickered open, heavy and reluctant. Her chest ached, not just from the sickness that had gripped her for weeks, but from the weight of betrayal she could feel in the air. Every muscle in her body screamed for relief, but her mind was alert, scanning the room. Her gaze fell on the small glowing screen of her
How could
husband's
you?
phone resting
I
on the
can't believe
bedside
this.
table. A name she didn't recognize appeared on the display. A smiling photo, a voice note waiting to be played. Her heart stopped for a second. Emeka, she whispered. Her voice cracked, brittle as dry leaves. He entered then, quiet and almost too composed, carrying a glass of water that he set on the bedside table with a soft clink. His eyes avoided hers at first, lingering instead on the pale walls and the faint shadow of a clock ticking relentlessly above the wardrobe. I I can explain, he said carefully, like a man rehearsing lines from a script he had repeated 100 times. Ifeoma's lips trembled. Explain what, Emeka? Explain how you can lie to me while I'm sick? Explain how you married her? His eyes flickered with a shadow of guilt, but it disappeared quickly. He shrugged as if to suggest that life was complicated and sometimes love had to be divided. Complicated? She asked, coughing violently, gripping his wrist in a feeble attempt to anchor herself. You call? Betraying me while I'm lying here. Complicated? Emeka sighed, brushing a lock of her hair back from her face. I never wanted you to find out this way. I swear, Ifeoma. But Ifeoma pulled back, weakness clashing with fury. Swear? You swore every day while you were seeing her. You smiled, you kissed me, you lied. While I while I she gasped, her words choking in her throat. Fever and rage coiled together, making her chest heave. Emeka took a step closer. I I love you, but Ifeoma laughed bitterly. It was a sound devoid of humor. Love me? You don't know the meaning of love. Love doesn't abandon someone when they need you most. Love doesn't. Her voice trailed off, but the message was clear. Emeka had failed her completely. The story of Ifeoma and Emeka had begun innocuously, as many love stories did in Lagos. They met at the University of Lagos, her bright smile catching his attention in the library aisle, where she was searching for a book on modern African literature. He had approached her with a clumsy, endearing charm, asking if she knew where he could find something to impress the professor with. She had laughed, a sound that, according to Emeka, lingered in his mind like a favorite song, and a friendship formed. Over time, friendship blossomed into love. They dated, shared their dreams, and promised each other forever under the sprawling Lagos sky, amidst the sounds of street vendors and traffic jams. They moved into their Victoria Island apartment shortly after graduation, full of hopes and ambitions. Emeka secured a high paying job with a tech company, and Ifeoma, ever the nurturing soul, dedicated herself to supporting him and building a home. But life had a cruel sense of timing. Just as Ifeoma's career began to flourish and she started her own small business, the sickness hit. Doctors were baffled. It started as a mild fatigue but escalated into a persistent fever, dizziness, and unrelenting weakness. Hospital visits became frequent, and the vibrant woman who once laughed freely now spent hours staring at the ceiling, questioning why life seemed to punish her so relentlessly. During this period, Emeka changed. At first, he claimed stress at work, long hours, and exhaustion. He would leave for meetings in the mornings, return late at night, and bring home excuses instead of comfort. It was subtle at first, just a missed hug here, a forgotten call there. But slowly, his absence became conspicuous. Ifeoma, confined to her bed and consumed with her illness, sensed the shift. Her intuition whispered truths she wasn't ready to hear. One rainy evening, she had overheard his voice, soft, intimate, laughing in a way he hadn't laughed with her in months. Heart pounding, she crept closer to the living room door, listening to a conversation that would shatter her world. I can't wait to see you again. I know she's sick, but you. I can't help myself, he said, his tone smooth, casual. The words pierced her like shards of glass. She had always believed in loyalty, in the sacredness of their vows, but reality had other plans. And in that moment, Ifeoma realized the extent of his betrayal. As the days passed, Lagos seemed almost cruel in its vibrancy. Outside her window, the city throbbed with life. Hawkers called out their wares, buses screeched as they turned corners. The smell of fried plantain and roasted corn mingled with exhaust fumes. But inside her apartment, the world had collapsed. Her friends visited when they could, their faces etched with concern. Ifeoma, why don't you leave him? He's not worth this, they urged, but she could not. Part of her clung to memories of the man she loved, hoping that somewhere under the selfishness there remained the Emeka she once knew. Yet the betrayal weighed heavier each day. She found herself watching him closely, observing the little things, the way he checked his phone with excessive care, the faint scent of another woman's perfume on his clothes, the way he avoided eye contact. And each observation brought a fresh wave of heartbreak and fury. By the third week of her illness, Ifeoma had grown weak but determined. She began documenting everything: the phone messages, the strange absences, the inconsistencies in his stories. Every lie, every betrayal was noted, stored, and remembered. She realized that strength was not just physical, it was also mental, emotional, and moral. And Lagos, in all its chaos, seemed to mirror her internal storm: the incessant traffic, the shouting hawkers, the relentless energy of a city that never rested. It all served as a backdrop to her growing resolve. She would not let Emeka's betrayal define her. She would survive, she would reclaim her dignity, and in time, karma would find him. As the sun rose over Victoria Island, painting the apartment walls with a pale, golden light, Ifeoma stared out of the window, feeling the faint stirrings of hope. She was still sick, still weak, but inside her a spark had ignited, a spark fueled by anger, betrayal, and the unshakable belief that life had a way of balancing the scales. She didn't know exactly how it would happen or when, but one thing was certain: Emeka would face the consequences of his choices. Lagos might be bustling, noisy, and indifferent to the suffering of one woman, but fate, like the tides of the Atlantic nearby, was patient. And when it moved, it was unstoppable. The morning sun spilled into Victoria Island with the harsh clarity that Lagos mornings were notorious for. The city hummed with life as early hawkers hustled for the day, buses roared over uneven roads, and the faint smell of fried akara mingled with exhaust fumes. Yet inside apartment 4B, the air was heavy, thick with tension, resentment, and the silent pain of a woman who had been betrayed at her weakest moment. Ifeoma lay in bed, her body still ravaged by sickness, but her mind was sharp and unforgiving. The discovery of Emeka's betrayal had shattered more than her trust. It had cracked open the foundations of her very life. Every memory of love, every promise whispered under Lagos skies, now felt poisoned. Her fingers trembled as she clutched the blanket, and for the first time she allowed herself to truly see the man beside her, not the husband she thought she knew, but a stranger who had worn her love as a mask while committing the ultimate betrayal. Emeka, meanwhile, moved around the apartment with a practiced casualness that made his guilt almost invisible. He poured tea into 2 cups, pretending as though life had not shifted irrevocably overnight. Here, he said softly, extending a cup to Ifeoma, his eyes avoiding hers. You need to drink this. You're weak. Ifeoma stared at the cup as though it had been poisoned. Weak? Yes, but not powerless, Emeka. I may be sick, but I am not blind, not anymore. Her words hung in the air like a judgment. Emeka's throat tightened. He had always been confident, even cocky, that he could manipulate the world and the people around him. But this unwavering stare, filled with pain and steel, unsettled him. You don't understand, he began, but she cut him off. I understand perfectly, she said. You married her while I was dying in front of you. You chose to betray me at the exact moment I needed you the most. And you thought, what? That I wouldn't find out? Emeka's hands twitched as if he wanted to grab her, to apologize, to plead, but words alone could no longer bridge the chasm he had created. He realized, perhaps too late, that love cannot thrive on deceit. Outside, Lagos continued its relentless rhythm. The city, indifferent to human suffering, was both a witness and a participant in the unfolding drama. Traffic snarls, street hawkers, and the distant wail of sirens formed a soundtrack that mirrored Ifeoma's stormy mind. She could almost imagine the city conspiring against Emeka, every driver's honk a warning, every shout from the street a reminder that life does not forgive easily. Her thoughts drifted to her family. Her mother, a woman of quiet dignity, had always warned her about the dangers of misplaced trust. Her father, though stern, had instilled in her a sense of moral righteousness that now surged through her veins. She knew she could not face this betrayal alone. She would need allies, support, and most importantly, a plan. Emeka, oblivious to her internal plotting, was busy on his phone, smiling at messages from the other woman. Her name, Chidinma, glowed on the screen like a badge of conquest. They had met in a Lagos nightclub, a chance encounter that had quickly spiraled into something more dangerous than either had anticipated. The thrill of secrecy, the intoxicating freedom of duplicity had ensnared him, clouding his judgment and eroding the man he once was. Ifeoma, catching a glimpse of the screen, felt a wave of nausea mixed with burning anger. This was not just betrayal, it was a public display of contempt for their shared life, a deliberate act of disrespect while she battled illness. Days turned into weeks. Ifeoma's health fluctuated between weak recoveries and sudden relapses, but her resolve grew stronger with each passing day. She began keeping a journal, documenting every interaction with Emeka, every lie, every hidden message she discovered. Each note, each observation was a brick in the fortress of her eventual revenge. Her friends became her confidants. Ngozi, her childhood friend, visited almost daily, carrying home-cooked meals and words of encouragement. Ifeoma, you have to fight, she urged one evening as she adjusted the blanket around her friend's frail shoulders. He has betrayed you, yes, but don't let him break you. Lagos is full of opportunities for women like us to rise, even from the darkest places. Ifeoma nodded weakly, absorbing the words like a lifeline. Ngozi's visits became a ritual of sorts, moments of normalcy amidst chaos. She also began speaking to a few trusted relatives discreetly, letting them know that Emeka had married another woman while she was sick. The news, though shocking, was met with predictable outrage. Her family began formulating strategies, offering advice, and subtly hinting at the karmic justice they believed would eventually confront Emeka. Meanwhile, Emeka's other life was thriving, or so he thought. Chidinma, a younger, ambitious woman with an eye for luxury, was enamored by Emeka's charm and the status he represented. They met in upscale restaurants, drove through Lekki in his borrowed SUV, and whispered plans of future trips abroad. Lagos, in its bustling chaos, had given them the perfect cover. No one suspected the depths of deceit within apartment 4B, and Emeka thrived on this illusion of invincibility. But life has a way of creating loops. Small, seemingly insignificant events began to foreshadow the coming storm. The security guard at their building started asking questions about unusual visitors. Even in the city that never sleeps, the shadows were gathering, quietly watching, waiting. Ifeoma, though weakened by illness, began noticing the patterns. She would watch from her bedroom window as Emeka left for Chidinma, his car cutting through the Lagos traffic like a predator hunting its prey. She memorized his schedule, noted his habits, and began preparing. Her illness, which once seemed like a prison, became her shield. No one suspected the strength building in a woman who looked frail but burned with silent fury. Weeks later, a confrontation was inevitable. It began with a simple misunderstanding at a family gathering where Emeka had brought Chidinma under the guise of a business acquaintance. The lie unraveled quickly. Eyes widened, whispers spread, and the family's anger was palpable. Emeka tried to defend himself, but the truth was a relentless tide. Every witness, every word spoken by Ifeoma's relatives chipped away at the fortress he had built around his deception. Ifeoma, though still physically weak, felt a surge of vindication. She had not needed to speak much. Her presence, her gaze, and the undeniable proof of betrayal spoke louder than words. Emeka's arrogance began to crumble, replaced by a creeping panic. For the first time, he realized that karma was not a distant concept. It was a looming force, patient and merciless, ready to strike. By the time Lagos settled into the quiet hum of night, apartment 4B had transformed. It was no longer just the home of sickness and betrayal. It had become the arena where the first acts of reckoning would unfold. Ifeoma lay on her mattress, clutching her journal, her mind racing with plans, possibilities, and the inevitable confrontation that would soon demand her courage. Emeka, unaware of the storm he had unleashed, drifted off to sleep with a sense of false security. But Lagos, with its bustling streets, chaotic energy, and watchful eyes, had other plans. The city, indifferent yet observant, seemed to whisper, no betrayal goes unnoticed, no lie remains unpunished, and karma is patient. And in the heart of Victoria Island, the first threads of retribution were already weaving themselves, silent but inexorable, ready to unravel Emeka's carefully constructed life. The Lagos sun beat down mercilessly on Victoria Island, yet inside apartment 4B, the air was heavier than the heat outside. The oppressive silence had grown into a thick tension, an invisible wall separating Ifeoma from the man she had once called husband. Her body, still weak from illness, seemed fragile to the outside. Aye, but inside a storm brewed. Pain had hardened into resolve, betrayal into purpose. Every moment of suffering she endured had been fuel, igniting a fire she could no longer contain. Emeka, on the other hand, carried himself with a false confidence, blissfully unaware of the slow, deliberate changes in the life he had tried to control. He thought his charm, his wealth, and his deception had given him invincibility, but Lagos, in all its chaotic glory, has a way of humbling the arrogant. Earlier that week, Ifeoma had begun to piece together the extent of his betrayal. It wasn't just the secret marriage. There were bank transactions, gifts sent to Chidinma, late-night rendezvous. She had found receipts tucked in drawers, messages hidden under phone apps he assumed she couldn't access. Every discovery cut like a blade, but also revealed a pattern, a roadmap of his treachery. She remembered the night she confronted him about the first text from Chidinma, a simple, "Can't wait to see you again," and how he had laughed nervously, dismissing it as just a friend. That laugh had haunted her, echoing in the empty corners of the apartment, mingling with the hum of the city outside. And now, armed with proof, she was no longer afraid. Her strategy was subtle at first. She observed, noted, and waited. Each interaction with Emeka was carefully measured. She learned when he left for Chidinma, memorized the time and route. She tracked patterns, timing, and behaviors that would later serve her plan. Every lie he told, every slip, was a breadcrumb leading her toward the inevitable confrontation. It was during this period that Lagos seemed to take sides. The city's relentless rhythm, the blaring horns, the distant cries of street hawkers became a chorus of omen. Even the neighbors seemed to notice small oddities. Late night visitors to apartment 4B, Emeka's furtive glances, whispered phone conversations, but no one could intervene. Lagos is a city that thrives on spectacle, yet it allows private dramas to play out in silence until the climax. Emeka's overconfidence reached new heights when he took Chidinma to an upscale hotel in Lekki for a weekend. He believed he had outsmarted everyone, including Ifeoma. Little did he know, every step he took outside the apartment was being catalogued, every action observed by the woman he thought was powerless. Ifeoma's mind worked like a finely tuned engine. While he reveled in what he believed to be freedom, she mapped out possibilities, contingencies, and the precise moments that would leave him exposed. One morning, as Emeka returned from one of these secret trips, he found Ifeoma sitting in the living room, a notebook in her hands. Her posture, calm yet imposing, made him pause. "You're home early," she said, her voice steady but carrying an undertone of threat. I I had a meeting, he stammered, trying to mask the panic rising in his chest. "Sure," she replied lightly, tapping her pen against the notebook. "I've been busy too, watching, noticing, and remembering everything." Emeka laughed nervously, but it sounded hollow even to him. Something had changed. The Ifeoma he knew, the woman who had once been gentle, sick, and dependent, was gone. In her place was a force of quiet vengeance, patient and deliberate. Meanwhile, Chidinma, oblivious to the growing tension, continued to revel in her illicit romance. She was ambitious, confident, and increasingly brazen, sending Emeka photos from high-end boutiques and expensive restaurants. Her messages, which once made him feel powerful, now brought a flicker of anxiety he tried to ignore. The city outside mirrored their affair, fast, loud, and dangerous, but it was only a matter of time before the walls of deceit collapsed. At the same time, Ifeoma's network of allies quietly expanded. Ngozi became a constant presence, helping her with small errands, researching ways to expose Emeka, and even consulting legal advice on separation and property matters. Relatives offered discreet support, reminding her that in Lagos, reputation matters and betrayal rarely goes unnoticed. Every whispered plan, every shared piece of information strengthened her resolve. The turning point came unexpectedly. One evening, Emeka returned home to find Ifeoma gone. A note lay on the table, written in her steady, precise handwriting. "I am not powerless. I am not broken. I will see this through. Every choice you've made, every lie will meet its consequence." Panic surged through Emeka. For the first time, he felt the weight of reality pressing down on him. His life, once carefully controlled, now teetered on the edge. Every lie, every betrayal, every secret rendezvous had led to this moment. And Lagos, in its ceaseless chaos, seemed to watch silently as his empire of deception began to crumble. Ifemoma had vanished into the city for a few hours, meeting with allies, gathering information, and preparing the next phase of her plan. Her illness, while still debilitating, no longer defined her. She moved through Lagos with a calculated purpose, blending into the city's relentless rhythm while laying the groundwork for retribution. That night, Emeka couldn't sleep. Every sound in the apartment, creaking floorboards, distant car horns, the hum of the fridge, felt amplified, a chorus of warning. For the first time, he questioned his choices. The thrill of secrecy had evaporated, replaced by an all consuming dread. Meanwhile, Ifeoma returned at dawn, her presence silent but commanding. She observed Emeka, noting the subtle signs of fear, the tightness around his eyes, the stiffness in his movements. She had become a strategist, a general surveying the battlefield. Lagos, with its chaos, had become her ally. Her health remained fragile, but her mind was razor sharp. Every plan, every maneuver, every patient observation
Hey guys, hope you're enjoying the story. Please subscribe and comment where you're watching from. Your support keeps us going. Thank you.
know that justice, whether swift or slow, is inevitable, and when it came, it would be absolute. The days that followed were a delicate dance. Emeka tried to maintain control, juggling the two lives he had built on lies. Ifeoma, however, was always one step ahead. She exploited every opportunity, gathering evidence, strengthening alliances, and subtly exposing inconsistencies in his stories. Each encounter became a test, a trap, a demonstration of how betrayal breeds vulnerability. By the end of the week, the first cracks in Emeka's facade became undeniable. Friends noticed his anxiety, colleagues whispered about his distracted demeanor, and Chidinma began to sense tension she couldn't explain. Lagos, ever watchful, seemed to tighten its grip, a living reminder that no deceit goes unnoticed forever. And so, the stage was set. Apartment 4B, once a place of love and shared dreams, had transformed into a battlefield. Ifeoma, though still weakened by sickness, stood poised to reclaim her life. Emeka, drunk on arrogance and deception, was teetering on the edge. Lagos, with its sprawling streets, relentless energy, and unblinking gaze, bore silent witness. The city, indifferent yet omnipresent, whispered warnings in every horn, every shout, every echo bouncing off concrete walls. Betrayal had been committed, pain had been endured. And now the rising storm, patient, calculated, and unrelenting, was beginning to move. Lagos was relentless. Its streets throbbed with life at all hours. And yet, inside apartment 4B, a storm of a different kind raged quietly. Ifeoma's sickness still weighed her body down, but her mind had never been sharper. Each day brought new discoveries, subtle insights into Emeka's double life, and the realization that the man she had once loved was slipping further into a web of his own making. The first mistake came subtly. Emeka, blinded by arrogance and his belief in invincibility, had underestimated Ifeoma's intelligence and determination. He continued to meet Chidinma openly in restaurants, taking care to act casual, yet leaving digital footprints in emails and messages he thought were private. He spent hours on the phone, oblivious to the fact that Ifeoma had long learned to read between the lines, track his locations, and anticipate his movements. One humid Lagos afternoon, Ifeoma's opportunity arrived unexpectedly. Emeka had left his laptop open, logged into his email. She had always been careful, observing, but never acting impulsively. But today, curiosity and determination combined, compelling her to take the first step. She scrolled through his inbox, carefully noting conversations with Chidinma. There were messages about hotel bookings, expensive gifts, and whispers of a future together. Each line was a dagger, but also a piece of the puzzle. She saved every email, took screenshots, and stored them in a hidden folder on a USB drive. Proof that would eventually dismantle his illusions. That evening, she confronted him, not with anger, but calm precision. I know everything, she said, holding the USB drive like a weapon. Her voice was quiet, controlled, yet every word carried weight. Emeka's hand froze mid-motion as he poured himself a drink. What are you talking about? His eyes darted nervously, scanning for escape. I've seen the emails, the messages, the lies, she replied. You thought I was too weak to notice. You were wrong. Panic flashed across his face. For the first time, Emeka realized that his arrogance had blinded him to the consequences. Ifeoma wasn't just ill and passive. She was observant, calculating, and ready to act. Meanwhile, Chidinma's life began to unravel. She noticed Emeka's nervous glances, the subtle distance growing between them. Texts went unanswered for hours, calls were shorter than usual, and his charm, once irresistible, now carried a strange edge of fear. Lagos, with its restless energy, mirrored her growing insecurity. She confided in a friend, her words tinged with frustration and suspicion. I don't understand, she said, pacing her apartment in Lekki. He's been acting different. I feel like someone is watching him, watching us. Her friend laughed nervously, thinking it was paranoia. But in truth, Ifeoma's quiet surveillance had already started to shape events, turning the city itself into a chessboard, where Emeka and Chidinma were the pieces moving unknowingly toward inevitable consequences. The tension in apartment 4B escalated further during a family visit. Emeka had invited Chidinma under the pretense of a casual dinner, but Ifeoma, anticipating this, had prepared carefully. She had briefed her mother, her sister, and Ngozi on subtle cues to observe. Every gesture, every reaction, every slip of the tongue was noted, recorded, and filed mentally. As dinner progressed, small cracks began to appear. Emeka's charm faltered, his explanations grew convoluted, and his tone became defensive. Chidinma, noticing the discomfort, questioned him subtly, but he deflected, only deepening the suspicion. By the end of the evening, tension had reached a boiling point. Ifeoma, calm as ever, smiled politely, knowing that she had successfully initiated the first domino of exposure. Emeka's first major miscalculation came when he tried to manipulate Ifeoma into believing that he was still loyal and that Chidinma was merely a fleeting distraction. He arranged a meeting, thinking his smooth words could charm her back into submission. Ifeoma, however, had prepared meticulously. She brought records, receipts, and screenshots of every deceitful interaction. When he tried to justify himself, she remained silent, letting the evidence speak for her. The confrontation was electric. Every lie he uttered was countered with proof. Every excuse crumbled against the wall of truth she had built. By the end, Emeka sat in stunned silence, unable to argue, unable to charm, and most importantly, unable to escape the realization that karma had begun its work. The first signs of karmic justice appeared subtly at first. A client Emeka had promised to meet suddenly cancelled, citing unprofessional behavior he hadn't anticipated. Ifeoma, while still battling her sickness, began to feel a resurgence of strength. She walked through Lagos streets with a quiet purpose, blending seamlessly into the city's rhythm while subtly maneuvering the pieces of her plan. She met Ngozi in cafes, discussed legal options with trusted relatives, and started documenting the final steps needed to expose Emeka fully. The city itself became a character in the unfolding drama. From the crowded streets of Lekki to the chaotic markets of Ikeja, every corner held a reminder of human ambition, folly, and consequence. Lagos was indifferent, yet it reflected the inner turbulence of its inhabitants. Every horn, every shout, every distant siren echoed the tension brewing in apartment 4B. The metropolis seemed to whisper warnings. Betrayal has a price, and karma waits patiently. As night fell, Emeka sat alone, drinking heavily, grappling with the mounting evidence of his misdeeds. He tried to convince himself that he could regain control, that Ifeoma's illness had dulled her judgment, that Chidinma's love could save him. But deep inside, he felt the first pangs of fear, a recognition that the tide had shifted. The game he thought he controlled was no longer his to command. Ifeoma, meanwhile, rested quietly, her journal beside her, filled with plans, observations, and strategies. She had begun the process of reclaiming her life, brick by brick, using patience, intelligence, and the inevitable force of karma as her allies. By the time Lagos drifted into the early hours of dawn, one truth had become undeniable. The tables were turning. Emeka, once confident and arrogant, was beginning to see the first shadows of the consequences he had long ignored. And Ifeoma, though still fragile, had discovered a power far stronger than sickness or betrayal. The power of a woman determined to reclaim her life and demand justice no matter how long it took. Pause. It does not wait. An apartment 4B, tucked away on Victoria Island, had become the epicenter of a private storm that would eventually ripple through the metropolis. Ifeoma, still fragile from illness, had begun to rise. From the shadows of weakness into a figure of quiet, calculated power, her mind, sharper than ever, worked in ways Emeka had never anticipated. The first shock came when Emeka made another careless mistake. He had promised Chidinma a weekend getaway in Lekki, a plan meticulously detailed in his phone messages. He thought it was discreet. He always did. But Ifeoma, aware of every movement, had already set things into motion. She reached out to a mutual friend in Lagos, someone neutral but trustworthy, and through subtle hints ensured that Chidinma would be confronted, not violently, but with undeniable proof of Emeka's duplicity. When the confrontation happened, it was devastating. Chidinma's trust shattered in moments. She had believed in a romance built on charm, luxury, and secrecy. But now, with evidence carefully orchestrated by Ifeoma, she could no longer deny the reality. She was the other woman, and Emeka had lied at every turn. Emeka's panic was palpable, for the first time he could feel the walls closing in. Every step he had taken, every choice he had made, seemed to echo against the concrete walls of apartment 4B. Lagos, in its sprawling chaos, seemed to mock him. Street hawkers shouted as if warning him. Car horns bled in rhythm with his rising heartbeat. Even the city's relentless traffic became a metaphor for the trap he had unknowingly walked into. Ifeoma observed quietly from the window, her strength invisible but undeniable. She had begun taking small, deliberate steps to reclaim her life. She engaged with her lawyer relatives, subtly preparing the legal framework to confront Emeka's lies and protect her assets. She documented every slip he made, every falsehood, and every betrayal. Her illness, once a symbol of vulnerability, became her shield. No one suspected the force behind the frail figure in bed. Meanwhile, Emeka's social circle began noticing changes. Friends who once admired his confidence now whispered about his distracted behavior. Colleagues noticed missed deadlines, nervous glances, and inconsistent stories. Even Chidinma, previously infatuated with him, began questioning his reliability. Lagos, ever watchful, had begun to conspire in the quietest of ways, amplifying the first consequences of his choices. One evening, Emeka attempted to assert control. He sat across from Ifeoma, trying to charm and manipulate. "I can fix this," he said, his voice trembling despite his bravado. "We can start over. You're overreacting." Ifeoma's gaze was unyielding. "Fix this? You think everything can be undone with empty words?" She leaned forward, her voice calm but sharp. "You don't understand. I've been planning for this moment. Every lie, every betrayal, it's all accounted for. And now the reckoning begins." Her words hung in the air like a storm warning. Emeka felt the first real tremor of fear. The following days were a careful dance. Ifeyoma orchestrated small incidents to destabilize Emeka further. She left subtle messages that Chidinma would inevitably discover, planted evidence of secret meetings, and even created situations where Emeka had to lie multiple times to keep his facade intact. Each lie weakened him. Each deception tightened the noose he had unknowingly placed around his own life. And Lagos watched. The city's chaos mirrored the tension within the apartment. Street vendors argued over prices, traffic snarled, and distant sirens wailed, all ordinary events that took on the air of omens. Every beep, every shout, every movement outside became a reminder of inevitability. The consequences of betrayal do not wait. At the same time, Ifeoma's health slowly began to improve. Her strength returned, not just physically, but emotionally. She walked through Lekki, Ikeja, and Victoria Island with purpose, her mind a labyrinth of strategy. She met friends and relatives discreetly, strengthening alliances and preparing the ultimate confrontation. Her illness, rather than hindering her, became a cloak of invisibility. People underestimated the quiet woman who observed everything, calculated everything, and waited for the perfect moment to act. Emeka, increasingly paranoid, began making rash decisions. He avoided confrontations with Chidinma, lied more aggressively to friends, and tried to assert control at home. But each move only exposed him further. He was like a chess player blindfolded, moving pieces while his opponent watched every step. And Ifeoma was no ordinary opponent. She was patient, observant, and precise, a storm disguised in a fragile frame. The first direct confrontation came on a humid Friday evening. Emeka, frustrated by the crumbling of his control, lashed out verbally. "I've done so much for this family," he shouted, veins bulging. "Do you have any idea what I've sacrificed?" Ifeoma remained calm. Her eyes, sharp and unwavering, met his. "Sacrifice?" she asked softly, but her voice carried a weight that silenced him instantly. "You call this sacrifice? Betrayal at my weakest, lies to my face, marrying another woman while I was sick? That is not sacrifice. That is cowardice." He stared at her, mouth opening and closing, unable to counter. The room, once filled with tension, now vibrated with moral clarity. Lagos, with its ceaseless noise, seemed to pause for a moment, acknowledging the shift. That night, as Lagos settled into its restless rhythm, Emeka sat alone in the apartment, drinking and brooding. His life, once controlled with arrogance, had begun to unravel. Chidinma had distanced herself. His friends were wary, and Ifeoma's quiet strategy had made him the prey in a game he thought he dominated. Ifeoma, meanwhile, sat with her journal, documenting every detail, planning her next steps. She had learned that patience, intelligence, and observation were as powerful as any legal or emotional weapon, and the universe, like the city around her, had begun aligning with the inevitable. The tides were turning. Emeka, once untouchable in his arrogance, now faced the creeping reality that betrayal carries consequences. And in Lagos, karma does not sleep. The Lagos sky burned with the orange and purple streaks of sunset, casting a fiery glow over Victoria Island. The city pulsed as it always did. Buses screeched, street hawkers shouted, and cars honked in a chaotic symphony. But inside apartment 4B, a storm had reached its peak. Ifeoma, frail yet commanding, moved through her home with the calm precision of a general surveying a battlefield. Every plan she had laid over weeks, every observation she had made of Emeka's deceit, was now converging toward a single moment, the reckoning. Emeka, once confident and cocky, was visibly unraveling. His arrogance, which had fueled his affair and his lies, was now the chain that bound him. He had lost control of Chidinma, who had begun questioning his every word. His friends noticed his erratic behavior. Even business partners whispered about his distracted demeanor. And most of all, he could sense that Ifeoma was no longer the powerless woman he had betrayed. The night of the confrontation came quietly, but with immense tension. Ifeoma had gathered all the evidence she needed: emails, messages, receipts, and even a timeline of his movements with Chidinma. Ngozi had helped her coordinate a private gathering, a chance dinner where the final exposure would occur. Emeka believed it was a normal dinner. He did not suspect that every detail, every seating arrangement, and every person present was part of a carefully orchestrated plan. The guests arrived unaware of the brewing drama. Emeka greeted them confidently, smiling through his tension. Chidinma sat across from him, trying to maintain composure, unaware that the pieces were already in motion. Ifeoma entered last. She moved slowly, deliberately, her presence commanding the room. She carried herself with an air of dignity and quiet power. Her eyes, sharp and unwavering, met Emeka's. He felt it immediately, a wave of dread he could not explain. "Good evening, everyone," Ifeoma said softly, her voice carrying clearly across the table. "I invited you all here because there are truths that need to be told and lies that need to be exposed." Emeka laughed nervously, trying to dismiss her words as a joke. But the way she held up a USB drive silenced him instantly. Ifeoma began her revelation. One by one, she presented the evidence. Emeka's secret meetings, his emails to Chidinma, the purchases he had made in her name, and even the timeline of his marriage to the other woman while she was sick. The guest listened, stunned into silence. Chidinma's face paled as the reality hit her. Emeka's arrogance, which had blinded him for months, was now fully exposed. No, Emeka shouted, rising from his seat. I can explain. Explain. Ifeoma's voice cut through him like a blade. You married another woman while I was on my deathbed. You lied to my face every day. You betrayed love, loyalty, and everything we built. You don't get to explain anymore. You get to face the consequences of your choices. Chidinma, realizing the depth of Emeka's deceit, stood abruptly. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I can't believe this, she cried. I loved you. How could you? Emeka tried to reach for her, but she stepped back, shielding herself. His face was ashen. For the first time, he realized that everything he had taken for granted, power, charm, control, was gone. His arrogance had built him a castle of lies, and Ifeoma was now its executioner. The guests, once neutral, now understood the betrayal. Friends and family expressed shock and disappointment. Words of moral judgment, once unspoken, filled the room. Lagos itself, through the reactions of its citizens and the immediacy of social media, amplified Emeka's downfall. Ifeoma, standing tall despite her weakness, felt a sense of catharsis. The sickness that had once confined her body could not touch the power that now surged through her mind and spirit. Every insult, every betrayal, every sleepless night had led to this moment. And in this moment, justice, patient, relentless, and absolute, was served. Emeka's final defeat came when he attempted to justify his actions in a last-ditch effort. I I never meant. You never meant? Ifeoma repeated, her voice low but cutting. Intentions mean nothing without action. You acted, you betrayed, and now you face the results. His knees buckled. Tears, unbeaten and full of shame, ran down his face. The man who had once walked Lagos streets with arrogance and confidence was now broken, humiliated, and powerless. Even Chidinma, despite her heartbreak, turned away from him. She had once been part of his secret world, but now she too was witness to the force of karma in motion. Lagos had watched silently, and now it had spoken. By the next morning, the city had heard of the events. Social media buzzed with the scandal. Friends, colleagues, and business associates learned of Emeka's betrayal. The man who had believed himself untouchable was now a cautionary tale. Meanwhile, Ifeoma, supported by family and friends, began to rebuild her life. Her health slowly returned. Her strength, once confined by sickness, became a symbol of resilience. She had faced betrayal, humiliation, and near death, and emerged victorious. From her window, she watched Lagos move below her, the chaotic, noisy, vibrant city that had witnessed her suffering and triumph. She smiled softly, knowing that life had a balance and that karma, patient and precise, had delivered justice in its own way. A few weeks later, Emeka had moved out, leaving apartment 4B and his lies behind. Chidinma had distanced herself completely, unable to forgive or trust. Friends and relatives had rallied around Ifeoma, offering support, love, and encouragement. Life, messy and unpredictable as ever, continued in Lagos. But for Ifeoma, it had finally begun to make sense again. Sitting on her balcony, sipping tea, and watching the sunset over the city, she reflected on the journey. She had been weak, sick, and betrayed, but she had endured. She had turned pain into strength, betrayal into strategy, and heartbreak into victory. And now, for the first time in months, she felt free. She picked up her phone, looked at the camera, and smiled softly, as if speaking to the world. Where are you watching from? Drop your country flag in the comments if you're proud of your country. And remember, no matter what life throws at you, stay strong. Justice, truth, and God's timing always prevail. The sun dipped below the Lagos skyline, the city bustling beneath her. Apartment 4B, once the stage of betrayal and suffering, was now a place of triumph, resilience, and restored dignity. And Lagos, ever watchful, had borne witness to karma's perfect timing.